Trigger warning. The film discussed in this video contains sensitive topics including racism, terrorism, rape, suicide, blackface, and racial slurs. If you are not comfortable with any of these, feel free to step out at any time.
It's like writing history with lightning. My only regret is that it is all so terribly true, said Woodrow Wilson on February 15th, 1915, just after viewing D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. This would be the first film ever screened at the White House. It would go down in history as one of the most controversial pieces of media ever made regarding the American Civil War and Reconstruction. The 1915 David Wark Griffith film, The Birth of a Nation, based upon Thomas Dixon, the Klansman, a play, depicts with gross historical inaccuracy the events of the Civil War and resulting Reconstruction period. This film has a long and complicated history and has had a lasting impact today as one of the most polarizing pieces of propaganda, with white Americans as its target audience. The creation of the film heavily involved Thomas Dixon in production, advertisement of the film, and as an authentic period source. The film is significant because it rewrites history to tell a false account of the Civil War and Reconstruction, sends a message that the KKK saved the South, and characterizes people and groups to support its message. The impact of the film was far-reaching, causing protests from groups like the NAACP, helped to revive and glorify the KKK, and has been the cause of the existence of many white supremacist groups today.
In 1861, the Civil War started. It was the culmination of hundreds of years of sectional differences and conflicts. Ever since the English North America was founded, the North had very few slaves, which was eventually phased out, whereas the South had become economically dependent on slavery. A large part of politics in the first half of the 19th century were debates around the expansion of slavery. This furthered the divide, and in 1861, with the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln, the South had officially decided to cede to create a new nation, which led to the conflict that split the nation in two. But by 1865, the South was defeated, and a long period of Reconstruction was ahead.
Under the 13th Amendment, nobody in America would ever be enslaved again. The addition of the 14th Amendment, allowing black men to vote, and the 15th Amendment, allowing citizenship for black men, made Reconstruction cause considerable change to the life of black people. But the Reconstruction period in the South was a violent and oppressive period, particularly towards black people. This time saw the rise of white supremacist terrorist groups like the KKK, extreme violence towards former slaves and northern politicians sent to work in the South, and the introduction of new laws that would suppress black people in the South for years. With the end of Reconstruction in 1877 under President Hayes, the South had fallen into a state of oppression and terrorism for years.
While Reconstruction was objectively much worse for black people, white Southerners felt a much different way. For white Southerners, they saw an oppressive federal government putting them under a military dictatorship, putting what they saw as an inferior race into office and denying them the rights that they thought they deserved. These views were grossly over-exaggerated and largely inaccurate, but this culminated in two things: the birth of domestic white supremacist terrorism and the lost cause.
As the 20th century began, the lost cause would sweep the South. The lost cause was the creation of a Southern mythology that attempted to preserve Confederate ideas by casting Southern defeat in the best possible light. This mythology would infiltrate the minds of many white Southerners and would result in the creation of pro-Confederate propaganda years after the Civil War, most notably the creation of Confederate statues. The mythology of the lost cause would persist for years in the South.
In 1912, Woodrow Wilson was elected president. World events at the time would lead to an American public that was aggressively nativist and racist. For Wilson, the superior race were the Anglo-Saxons. These beliefs were broadcasted to the American public, and with World War I happening in the international background, fear was rising in America, which Wilson capitalized on. With Wilson as president, racism and nativism on the rise, the existence of white terrorism in the South, and the existence of the lost cause, the stage was perfectly set for Thomas Dixon, who would approach multiple studios to adapt The Klansman into a film.
The Birth of a Nation is a film about how Reconstruction was viewed in the South and the glorification of the KKK in regards to black Americans. The main plot of the film focuses on two families, the Stonemans and the Camerons, and their interactions in political and social situations during the Civil War. The representation of the Stoneman father as a caricature of Thaddeus Stevens, and the portrayal of General Ben Cameron, the eldest Cameron's son, as a savior of the South and as a so-called noble founder of the Ku Klux Klan, shows the views of both Griffin and Dixon of the South during and after the Civil War. Following the story of Lincoln's assassination and how it reverberated throughout the South, the film explores the story of how the KKK and other racist white Southerners saw the African Americans and freed slaves, especially through a political lens. While showing the sympathies of both Northern and Southern families of the Confederacy, it also has many historical inaccuracies relating to the portrayal of Black Americans, using stereotypical and racist depictions of the film's characters, not to mention that almost all the African American characters were played by white actors in blackface.
D.W. Griffith used symbolism in his film to bring out his true intentions, relying on the audience that he was playing to, white Southerners, and their ideas of a true society. In the second title frame of the film, it says, "The bringing of the African to America planted the first seed of disunion." Griffith is insinuating how America before slavery was a utopia, and the arrival of African Americans directly turned into the Civil War, where Southerners felt that they lost more than they should have. This is seen being resolved at the end of the film, with mounted Klansmen intimidating black voters away from the polls. This is supposed to be the true ending, not the newlyweds and their respective honeymoons. Additionally, towards the beginning of the film, the father of the Southern family, the Camerons, has a cat in his lap and puppies at his feet. He drops the cat on the puppies, who proceeds to bat at them. As the cat is seen to come from the top, or the north, and the puppies lay on the floor, or south, this one scene, which feels very out of place in the film, is meant to be a metaphor for the Civil War, or as the Southerners view it, a war of northern aggression. And right at the end of the film, Jesus is used as a symbol of peace and pacifism, which is then undone by the rest of the film, as at almost all times it glorifies violence.
The film itself was adapted from the novel The Klansman, written by Thomas Dixon Jr. It's about the Ku Klux Klan and its rise to power. It discusses the social, economic, and political situation in the South in the Civil War and Reconstruction. This translated pretty directly into the film, which was lengthened to 3 hours to accommodate all the information from the book. However, Dixon's childhood, which was pretty conservative, influenced the way that he and other Southerners viewed the fall of the Confederacy and the racial issues that arose in turn. This directly impacted the way the book was written and its lasting controversy.
Thomas Dixon Jr. was born in 1864 in North Carolina and stayed there for most of his childhood. He was able to experience firsthand the socio-economic crisis the South was in after the Civil War. He got to go to school until the age of 13. After being ordained as Protestant minister back in North Carolina, Dixon began writing his Classman trilogy, focusing on the way Civil War and the following Reconstruction era impacted white families living in the South. He was a conservative, both religiously and politically, not believing in extending political rights to African Americans, which was apparent in the film.
Throughout the entire film, D.W. Griffith rewrites history to tell his story in a way that completely absolves white Southerners of any blame for the events that took place in the Reconstruction period. Early in the film, Griffith attempts to explain the reason for disunion and Southern secession. In this, he blames both the bringing of slaves to the continent, which attempts to blame the slaves, not the Europeans who forced them over, and the Northern abolitionists, who caused disunion due to their anti-Southern beliefs. Many other gross historical inaccuracies are depicted, including scenes of the antebellum South in which plantations are shown as peaceful places where slaves enjoyed their labor, attributes state rights, not slavery, as the main cause of the Civil War, attempts to show the South as inclusive and not racist by showing black Confederate soldiers at the beginning of war, and while the Confederacy did enlist black soldiers, this would only happen a month before the end of the war. Blames Lincoln's death on his Northern bodyguard, not John Wilkes Booth, the actual assassin and Southern sympathizer. The Freedmen's Bureau is shown as a corrupt organization which mismanages federal funds and depicts Southern governments run by black people as brutal, ineffective, and tyrannical. Perhaps the most infamous event tied to the birth of a nation was the screening of the film in the White House in March of 1915. President Wilson, his family, and various members of cabinet watched the film. The event itself was already fiercely controversial. It was elitist in nature to screen the film in privacy rather than to the public. It was essentially Griffith making the assumption that his film would be well received by the president and his advisors, thus establishing a basis of success and power for his film. When the film was over, Wilson is credited with saying, "It's like writing history with lightning. My only regret is that it is all so terribly true." This sentence has been endlessly debated by historians, but many take issue with the fact that his response is strangely positive and what it means for African American populations continuing into society today.
Almost immediately after the release of the film, membership in the KKK began to increase at an alarming rate. Because of the incorrect way that the film showed the Reconstruction era, many Southern whites saw it as justification for the political and social racism that many blacks faced. Many also used it as a reason to spark violence against African Americans in cities across the United States. The film was seen as the ultimate propaganda tool and was used to recruit white Americans to the KKK, even through to the 1970s. The Birth of a Nation showed Reconstruction in the South in a glorified light, glancing over the racist history. Because many Americans do not know much about Reconstruction and the true events that occurred during that time, the film influenced thoughts and opinions on African Americans and left viewers susceptible to racist thoughts and ideologies perpetrated by Griffith.
A large part of the second half of the film focuses on the passing of laws, including interracial marriage, and the fear that white women felt at the hands of black men. Such ideas including the Great Replacement theory. This film has contributed greatly to many white supremacist conspiracy theories and has helped stimulate the growth of modern white supremacist groups. Some conspiracy theories, like the aforementioned Great Replacement theory, have been used as justifications for modern white supremacist terrorism, including the 2015 Charleston church shooting, the 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, and most recently the 2022 Buffalo supermarket shooting. While this film is over 100 years old, its effect has continued to today. Many modern acts of hate and terrorism can be tracked down to this film. In our discussion of the historical context, symbolism, creation, significance, and impact of the film, it is important to recognize the countless ways the Birth of a Nation has changed and continues to change American society. We hope that this video will allow you to be able to identify elements of propaganda in the film and how it can impact you. Thank you guys.